So before we get into the subject of today's episode, you might have heard of this thing called tariffs. It seems to be the thing that everybody is talking about lately and freaking out about to some degree. What's your interpretation? What can we expect from tariffs in the way that they would affect, particularly the media landscape and YouTube? Is there any concern?
I mean, any concern? Look, for the last 5 years, actually going back to COVID, there's always been this like massive externality that really has nothing to do with, let's say, WatchMojo, YouTube. But, if somebody sneezes, you may catch a cold. So tariffs are the latest thing. After COVID, we also had interest rates shooting up, which obviously has like an effect across the economy. It's funny because the US, people don't know this, but between 1861 and 1933, the US was actually very much protectionist in terms of their economy. They were isolationist in terms of foreign policy until World War I. And then Woodrow Wilson was like in 1917 was like, we got to get involved. And then the 20th century was all about expansionist foreign policy to control resources, to project power, yada, yada. Economically, they were protectionist, right? And then what happens is to you, since this is ultimately, we talk about startups and tech and all that, let's take one company, Alphabet. So Alphabet, Google, in search, it's dominant. It's got a very closed-minded. It's protectionist. It's not going to open up its source code. It's not going to share advertising data. The same company, Alphabet, when it launched Google Plus, their social platform to rival Facebook, who was the dominant player, they were very open, very laissez-faire. Like, we'll share data because they're a challenger to the incumbent. Right. So similarly, coming out of, World War II, the US kind of wanted to totally take over from the British Empire and push back the USSR. So obviously, as a capitalist beacon or whatever, it kind of dropped all tariffs, and it largely adopted a very laissez-faire economic policy, which undoubtedly, along with like American ingenuity and yada yada, explain America's success in the 20th century. Mm-hmm. So fast forward to today, I go criticize and praise people, groups, when reasonable, don't be dogmatic about things. Yeah. There's 1,000 things I don't really like about Trump, but there are things about him that I understand his appeal to his voters. So I'm not saying this as like an anti-Trump guy at all, because I called his win in 2016. I said 2024 would be his to lose. So I was right on that front. He doesn't understand, I think, economics. That doesn't mean he's not like savvy or smart. He gets finance. Like, I studied finance, but economics is a different branch. Like today, there was a clip of him being like, are the Great Lakes connected? And I was like, Jesus Christ, he's learning geography today. And earlier this week, he was like learning tariffs. So I don't think that, in business especially, there's two kinds of leaders. There are those who surround themselves with a lot of smart people who are experts, and they might still follow their gut and instinct, but it's kind of like a weighted average, feedback that they distill and then come up with a recommendation. And then there are others who are just like fly off the seat of their pants, shoot first, ask later. And if we're going to be objective, Donald Trump is the second. Mm-hmm. It's not like he sits there and goes read Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations, or reads, economic policy, white papers, and then comes out and, he does none of that. So he doesn't really understand American consumers, because American consumers, many of them don't even want to work 5 days in an office. Mm-hmm. They're not going to go work in a stupid plant. Not that there's anything wrong with working in a plant, by the way. And American consumers are sure as hell not going to go buy an iPhone for $3,000. So he doesn't get American consumers, because what he's describing is not really even, I think, what most Americans would want to happen once you take them through this situation. But the reason ultimately why he kind of comes out, says something, and then backtracks is because he doesn't understand finance either. What ended up happening is he thought that just because America economically and militarily is this big, massive thing, that it could dictate to others. But what ended up happening is not so much that the stock market crashed and he panicked. It's more that the bond prices reacted a certain way, where His whole bet is to try to create and induce a recession, cool down the economy, to ultimately get the Federal Reserve to bring down interest rates. Now, a cynic would say that's a man with a lot of debt that cares a lot about what the cost of money, interest is. So he's trying to bring that down. But what ended up happening is a lot of foreign holders, creditors of US debt, Japan actually, America's so-called ally, they dumped American bonds thinking this is going to be a shit show. We don't want to hold this. And then interest rates went higher because now America had to give a bigger incentive to people to buy their debt. You could spin it all you want, art of the deal, winning. He's a fucktard is all that there's to it. His bet backfired. Just that simple. This was all about bringing interest rates down, but the opposite happened. Interest rates started to go up. So he realized he had to capitulate because the cost of money was going to go up. The stock market was going to continue to go down. And ultimately, tariffs do lead to smaller economies, less employment. So it's unfortunate. Now let's segue.
Yeah.
It doesn't really have an effect on us today. And I actually don't even complain. I mean, I'll make fun of things online because I'm just that kind of guy, maybe. But I can't really complain because, look, it's not like we're sitting on all this inventory or we're like shipping parts from China and now we got to think of warehousing them. It doesn't affect us directly in the near term. But in the long run, it's a bit like when interest rates during the end of ZIRP, zero interest rate phenomenon, when inflation went up, interest rates shot up. So as companies are like, hey, it's more expensive to do things now, eventually they do scale back marketing.
Yeah.
Who's advertising? So that affects everybody. So my gut is that, like many other things that Trump says, it is just a lot of noise and distraction. I don't necessarily think this will get to a place where, but the damage, some of it has already been done, because if you are, if you are a decision maker, you look at America like the crazy, unstable chick that is not going to be consistent and reliable. So that's not good. But again, does it affect us? Not really. Like the broader fundamental trends of AVOD and YouTube and all that doesn't really affect us. But I mean, you could see that it's going to have effects, and we are not immune to that.